What would you do if your own sister stood up in the middle of the grandest ball of the year, pointed at you in front of every powerful person in the city, and laughed the words "Nobody wants you"? And then, in the silence that followed, the most feared man alive set down his glass and began walking across the room toward you. The music died. 300 faces turned. And the girl who had spent her whole life being told she was the one nobody chose stood frozen beneath the chandeliers, waiting for the floor to swallow her whole. It did not. Instead, a man whose name people were afraid to say out loud crossed that ballroom, and everything the world believed about her began, in a single unhurried moment, to come undone. This is a story of cruelty and hidden worth, of a discarded girl and a dangerous man, and of the night that everyone's contempt finally, catastrophically backfired. Wren Callahan had spent 26 years learning how to take up less room. She was the eldest daughter of Desmond Callahan, a man who ruled the city's construction unions with a fist and a smile. And in her father's house, she had exactly one recognized quality. She was not Delphine. Her younger sister was slender and gleaming and cruel, and beside her Wren had always been the other one, soft where Delphine was sharp, quiet where Delphine dazzled, generously curved in a family that measured a daughter's worth in dress size. Her mother died when Wren was 12, and after that the household stopped pretending. She was called the spare. She was seated at the far end of tables. She was told, so often and so casually that it stopped sounding like cruelty and started sounding like weather, that she was the one nobody would want. Nobody saw what she actually was. While Delphine collected admirers, Wren had quietly become the only reason the Callahan family had not collapsed. She kept the books. She caught the errors. She had a mind that read a ledger the way other people read a face. And for 6 years, she had silently balanced her father's crooked accounts, papering over the rot, keeping the union contracts alive with a genius no one bothered to acknowledge. Her father took the credit. Her sister took the jewelry. And Wren took the blame whenever anything went wrong. On the night everything changed, she was ordered to attend the winter charity ball, not as a guest, but as a prop, because a family needed to look complete. She wore a gown of deep sapphire she had saved for in secret, tailored to celebrate curves she had spent a lifetime apologizing for, and climbing the marble steps, she almost let herself feel beautiful. She had no idea that across that ballroom, a man carved from stillness and menace was already watching her, and that her sister was about to make the single greatest mistake of her life. The ballroom of the old Ashford Hotel was a cathedral of crystal and calculated perfection, and Wren spent the first hour pressed against a marble pillar, praying the shadows would swallow her. She watched her sister hold court beneath the chandeliers, watched her father laugh too loudly with men who owed him money, and felt the familiar ache of being furniture in her own family. She had almost reached the terrace doors when Delphine found her. Her sister arrived with a wine glass in one hand and an audience trailing behind her, and Wren knew, the instant she saw that glittering smile, that she was about to be the evening's entertainment. "Oh, Wren," Delphine trilled, loud enough to turn heads. "You came, and you wore blue." She let her eyes travel down her sister's body with theatrical pity, and a ripple of anticipatory laughter moved through the beautiful crowd. "Darling, I say this with love," Delphine continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "But who exactly did you dress up for?" She turned to her audience, delighted with herself. 6 years father has been trying to marry her off, and not one man has said yes. Not one. She looked back at Wren, and she smiled, and she delivered the blade with perfect, practiced cruelty. "Nobody wants you, Wren. Nobody has ever wanted you. Stop embarrassing us both and go home." The laughter that followed was not a ripple. It was a wave. It rolled through 300 of the most powerful people in the city, and Wren's father, standing 10 feet away, did not say a word. He looked away. That was the part that broke her, more than the laughter, more than the words. Her own father looked away. Wren stood there, her cheeks burning, her eyes stinging, and every instinct she had ever built screamed at her to shrink, to apologize, to disappear the way she always did. But she did not scream. She did not cry. She did not run. She lifted her chin, and she looked her sister dead in the eye, and she said, quietly, so that only the nearest circle could hear, "At least I have never had to make someone else small to feel tall." And then the music stopped. Not because of Wren. Because across the ballroom, At a table where no one dared to sit uninvited, a man had risen to his feet. Everyone in that room felt it before they understood it. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Conversations died mid-syllable. The string quartet faltered and fell silent, and the crowd began to part, backing away as though repelled by a magnetic force, because Cassian Rios had set down his glass and started walking. He was tall and broad and dressed in a charcoal suit cut with lethal precision, and he moved with a terrifying, unhurried stillness that made grown men lower their eyes. Cassian Rios was the head of a syndicate that owned the ports and the docks and the fear of every powerful family for 100 miles, a man spoken of in whispers, rumored to end a life with a single unhurried nod. He had been in that ballroom for 2 hours and had spoken to no one. Every woman in the room had angled toward him at some point, socialites and models and senators' daughters, and he had looked through every one as though they were empty glass. He was surrounded, and profoundly, bone-deep alone. Now he crossed the marble floor, and 300 people held their breath, and Delphine, misreading everything the way beautiful people often do, arranged herself into a radiant smile and stepped forward to intercept him with her hand already lifting toward his arm. "Mr. Rios," she purred. Cassian walked straight past her. He did not so much as glance at Delphine. His broad shoulder caught her outstretched hand and moved it aside with the effortless dismissal of a man brushing past a coat rack, and Delphine stumbled, her wine sloshing, her mouth falling open in shock. And Cassian Rios stopped in front of Ren. Up close he was overwhelming, a full head taller than her, and the scent of him, cedar and tobacco, and something underneath that whispered danger, wrapped around her senses. Ren's heart hammered against her ribs. She was certain, in that endless second, that he had come to tell her she was blocking his path, that she did not belong, that she should go home. Instead, the most feared man in the city looked at her the way no one in her entire life had ever looked at her. He looked at her as though she were the only real thing in a room full of glass. Then he did the thing that would be whispered about in that city for years. He extended his hand, palm up, and he bowed his head, and he said, in a voice pitched low enough that the entire silent ballroom heard every syllable, "Dance with me." Ren stared at that open hand. Somewhere behind her, her sister made a small, strangled sound. She had no idea she was about to change the shape of her entire life. Ren put her hand in his. She would never be able to explain what made her do it. Perhaps it was that his palm was warm and steady and she had not been touched with kindness in years. Perhaps it was that her father had looked away. Or perhaps some buried part of her, the part that had kept a crooked empire alive for 6 years without a word of thanks, was simply, finally, done shrinking. Cassian's fingers closed around hers like a promise, and he drew her onto the floor as the quartet struck up a slow waltz. He set one large hand at the small of her back and pulled her flush against his solid chest, and Ren, who had spent her whole life apologizing for the space she occupied, waited for the polite distance men always kept when dancing with a woman her size. It did not come. If anything, he pulled her closer, his thumb tracing a slow, grounding circle against her spine. "Breathe," he ordered softly, his dark eyes locked onto hers. "You are trembling. Everyone is staring," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. "They will do that for the rest of your life now." He turned her masterfully into the music, and Ren's breath caught. "Why?" she managed. "Why did you cross the room?" Cassian's gaze flicked over her shoulder, assessing Delphine with cold calculation, and something dark curled at the corner of his mouth. "Because a woman in a room full of cowards told the truth out loud," he said, and not one person here had the spine to stand beside her. His eyes came back to hers, and softened, almost imperceptibly. "And because I have watched you for 2 hours, and you are the only person in this room who has not performed for me once." Ren's throat tightened. "You don't have to flatter me," she said, looking down at his lapel. "I know what I look like. I know what they all think." Cassian's hand tightened at her waist, and he tilted her chin back up with a knuckle, forcing her eyes to his. "Do not presume to know my tastes," he said, his voice a low vibration that shook something loose in her chest. "Your sister looks like every woman I have refused for a decade. You look like the first honest thing I have seen in years." For 3 minutes, in the arms of the most dangerous man alive, Ren Callahan forgot every cruel word she had ever been told. And when the song ended, Cassian did not release her. He kept his hand at her back, and he turned them both to face the frozen ballroom, and he said, quietly, so that every soul in that room heard it, "My name is Cashin Rios. This woman is under my protection, effective immediately. Anyone who mocks her, slights her, or looks at her the way you all did 10 minutes ago will answer to me, personally." His dead gaze found Delphine, then slid, deliberately, to her father. "And Desmond," he added, "we should talk about your books." Ren felt her father go pale from across the room. She did not yet know what that sentence meant. But her sister did, and so did the man standing quietly in the shadows behind Cashin's table. The man who had spent 15 years smiling at his boss's face while planning his funeral, and who had just watched the whole game change. The man in the shadows was Emmett, Cashin's consigliere, the silver-tongued second who had served the family since Cashin was young. And Emmett had a problem. For 2 years he had been bleeding the syndicate, skimming the port revenues through a maze of shell companies, and the Callahan construction accounts had been the perfect place to hide it, because Desmond was crooked enough to take the money and stupid enough not to ask questions. It had been flawless. And now, in one unhurried walk across a ballroom, his boss had announced an audit of the Callahan books and placed under his personal protection the one person alive who understood what was in them. Emmett smiled, thin and cold, and began, very quietly, to plan. The soft, overlooked sister, he was certain, would be the easiest thread to cut. It was the last mistake he would make as a free man. In the weeks that followed, everything in Ren's life inverted. Cashin did not court her the way men courted women. He simply, methodically, removed every wall the world had built around her. He sent a car for her the next morning, driven by his hulking, silent head of security, a man named Tobias who said almost nothing and missed absolutely nothing. He installed her in a private wing of his fortress above the water when it became clear her father's house had turned openly hostile. And then he did the thing that undid her completely. He gave her work. Not decoration, not charity. Work. He put the syndicate's tangled port ledgers in front of her and asked her, plainly, what she saw. And Ren, who had spent 6 years hiding her genius under a bushel so her father could take the credit, felt something long-frozen crack open in her chest. She saw everything. Within 3 days, she had found 4 errors his own accountants had missed. Within 2 weeks, she had restructured his holdings and saved him more than most of his captains earned in a year. And every night, over a decanter of amber whiskey he poured without asking. They worked until the tall windows went gray with dawn, and slowly the terrified woman from the ballroom straightened into someone formidable. He learned that she hummed when she was thinking, that she flinched at raised voices and softened at kindness, and it made him want to burn her family to the ground. And Cashin, who trusted no one, found himself telling her things he had never told another soul, about the father he had buried and the trust he had learned to bury with him. "You were built for this," he told her one night, watching her unravel a knot 3 professionals had failed to solve. "Do not ever apologize for taking up a room again." Later, when a problem kept them both awake until dawn, he walked her to her door and paused, and his hand rose to cradle her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheek, and Ren thought he might kiss her. Instead, he only looked at her, memorizing her, and murmured good night, and left her standing there with her heart pounding like a girl's, terrified of how much she had begun to want a man the whole world feared. But Ren, being Ren, had also started doing the one thing no one had ever counted on. She had started reading her father's books with the full weight of her attention, and the numbers had begun to whisper. There was money in the Callahan accounts that had no business being there. Not her father's usual grubby skimming, but something far larger and far more elegant, routed in through a maintenance shell and laundered out through phantom contracts, orchestrated by a hand that knew the syndicate's structure intimately. Someone inside Cashin's own house was using her family as a washing machine. She did not understand all of it yet. She understood enough to be frightened. And she did not know that Emmett had already noticed her reading. The reckoning came at a commission dinner, because cruelty, once cornered, always overreaches. Cashin brought Ren, dressed in deep emerald that celebrated every curve she had once hidden, into a private dining room thick with the most lethal men in the city, and seated her at his right hand, a position that made every capo recalculate the balance of power. Halfway through the evening, her family arrived. Desmond had begged for an audience, and came in gray-faced and sweating with Delphine on his arm in scarlet silk, because he still believed his beautiful daughter was a currency that worked everywhere. Delphine's eyes found Ren at Cashin's right hand and went vicious. She crossed the room, leaned over the table, and purred, "Mr. Rios, you must be so bored. I know my father made a mess, but there's no need to be stuck with the consolation prize." She spared Ren a glance of pure contempt. "Everyone knows nobody wants her. You can do so much better. Sitting right here." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Cashin did not raise his voice. He finished cutting a piece of his food, chewed, swallowed, and took an agonizingly long moment before lifting his gaze to the woman invading his space. "I don't recall inviting you to my table," he said. Delphine's smile flickered, but she rallied. "Cashin, please, we're family now, or we could be." Cashin set his fork down. The soft clink of silver on porcelain sounded like a gunshot. "Let me clarify something for you," he said, his tone deadly calm. "You stood in a ballroom and told 300 people that your sister was unwanted." He rose slowly to his feet, and the entire room seemed to shrink. "In the 6 years you spent being photographed, that woman kept your family solvent. Every contract that feeds you, she saved. Every account that clothes you, she balanced. Your father takes the credit and you take the jewelry, and neither of you has ever once said thank you." His dead eyes moved to Desmond. "And you," he said quietly, "looked away while your daughter was humiliated. I have killed men I respected more." He turned back to Delphine and delivered the killing stroke without ever raising his voice. "You possess nothing of value," he said. "No intellect, no loyalty, no use. My Ren has more worth in her little finger than your entire bloodline. Now walk away from this table before I have you removed by the hair." Delphine fled. Desmond followed, gray and shaking. And Cashin sat back down, took Ren's trembling hand in his, and pressed his lips to her knuckles in front of every capo in the city. "You never shrink for anyone again, Alma," he murmured, using the endearment for the first time. "Not in my world, and never in front of me." But across that room, Emmett was watching the way his boss looked at the Callahan girl, and he understood that his time had just run out. That night, he made his move. The estate went dark at 2:30. Ren woke to a silence so absolute it felt like a held breath, and every instinct honed in a house full of predators told her something was catastrophically wrong. The power was out. The backup generators stayed dead. She crept to the door and heard, from below, the muffled cough of a silenced weapon and the heavy sound of a body meeting marble. Cashin was in the city. He had left at midnight for an emergency at the docks. And Ren, barefoot in the dark, understood with terrible clarity that the emergency had been a lie to draw him away, and that whoever was in the house had come for her. She did not scream. She did not faint. She did not run blindly. She thought, the way she always had, cold and clear. And she did the one thing no one expected of the soft, overlooked sister. She went to the study. She had spent weeks in that room learning its every drawer, and she knew 2 things the men climbing the stairs did not. She knew the wall safe held Cashin's spare weapon and, more importantly, a hardwired satellite phone that did not depend on the house's system. And she knew, because she had memorized the estate's blueprints the way she memorized everything, that the study connected to the servant's passage behind the bookcase. She reached the safe as the footsteps hit the landing. Her fingers, steady in a way that surprised even her, entered the code Cashin had trusted her with, and she took the phone and sent a single line to the only number that mattered. Then she did something better than hide. She turned the house against them. She reached the security panel on emergency battery and triggered the lockdown, slamming steel fire doors across the upper hallway, cutting the intruders in half and sealing 2 of them in a corridor with no exit. Then she slipped into the servant's passage and pulled the bookcase shut behind her just as the study door splintered inward. "She's in here somewhere," a voice snarled. "Find the fat girl. Emmett wants her breathing." Ren pressed herself into the dark, her heart slamming, and understood, at last, whose hand had been in her father's books. Emmett. He came into the study himself, unhurried, certain, and he spoke to the dark as though he could feel her in it. "Come out, Ren," he said pleasantly. "You are a smart girl. You have already worked out that I have been washing money through your father for 2 years. And you have surely worked out that when Cashin sees what you found, I am a dead man. So you understand my position. Nothing personal. It's just accounting." He was 3 feet from the bookcase. And Ren, crouched in the dark, did the one thing he never expected. She spoke. "You should check the safe before you look for me, Emmett," she said. Silence. "Because 6 days ago I sent everything I found to a dead man's switch," she continued, her voice steady and clear through the panel. "Every shell company, every transfer, every forged contract, primed to fire to cash in, and every capo in this family unless I cancel it myself. Kill me tonight, and you do not just lose your fortune. You expose yourself to the entire syndicate as a thief who stole from his own blood." Emmett's certainty flickered. He had not planned for the bookkeeper to be armed. And in his half-second of hesitation, the front gates below exploded inward with the tortured shriek of an engine pushed past its limits. Cashin had come home. Time seemed to fracture. Gunfire erupted below, brief and brutal and absolute, and Emmett spun toward the sound, and Ren, seizing the only moment she would get, shoved the bookcase open with her full weight and drove it into him. The heavy oak caught him square in the chest and sent him crashing backward over the desk, his weapon skidding across the floorboards. She did not stop. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, and she knew exactly what to do with the half-second that bought her. She lunged for the weapon and kicked it into the dark, and then the study doors were kicked from their hinges and Cashin filled the doorway, soaked in rain, his suit ruined, his eyes wild and searching. Emmett scrambled up, and there was nowhere left to go. Tobias and 4 armed men flooded in behind their boss, and the trap the consigliera had spent 2 years building snapped shut around him instead. Cashin had him by the throat against the wall before the man could speak, and his voice was a lethal whisper. "You raised your hand against her." Then he turned his head, and the murderous cold in his eyes dissolved into raw, naked fear. He released Emmett to his men and crossed the room in 2 strides, his large hands moving frantically over Ren's arms, her face, her shoulders, checking for blood, for wounds, for any sign the world had hurt what was his. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his breathing ragged, his voice cracking against her hair. "Did he touch you? Look at me. Breathe. Tell me." "I'm all right," Ren wept, finally letting the terror crash over her, her fingers twisting in his soaked lapels. "I locked half his men in a hallway, and I hit him with a bookcase." Cashin let out a broken, disbelieving laugh into her hair, and then he framed her tear-streaked face in his trembling hands and looked at her the way no one in her whole, overlooked life had ever looked at her. "You are magnificent," he breathed. "My men missed what he was doing for 2 years, and you unraveled it at a desk." Then his expression cracked open completely. "I thought," he said hoarsely, "that I had crossed a ballroom for you. I did not understand until tonight that I would cross the whole world." Emmett, the man who had smiled at Cashin for 15 years while robbing him blind, learned the price of underestimating them before the week was out. Cashin did not act in blind rage. He let Ren lay the entire elegant crime before the commission, every shell company, every forged contract, every dollar routed through her father's crooked books. And when she was finished, she looked at her champion and did not counsel death. "You do not need to make him a martyr," she said quietly. "You need to make him nothing." So they did it her way. They stripped Emmett of every hidden asset, exposed his 2-year theft to the very families he had hoped one day to rule, and let them cast him out. He was left alive, bankrupt, disgraced, his name turned into a warning whispered across the underworld, a fate the old men agreed was far crueler than any quick and merciful bullet. And then there was her family. Ren did not go looking for revenge on the father who had looked away or the sister who had laughed. She simply, at last, stopped protecting them. For 6 years her genius had been the only thing between Desmond Callahan and ruin, and the moment she stepped back, the truth surfaced on its own. The contracts collapsed. The regulators came. The empire her father built on her hidden labor crumbled inside a season because it had never once been held up by him. Delphine, who had spent her life as a currency, learned that a currency is worthless the moment the bank fails. Her admirers evaporated, and the glittering circle that had laughed at Ren now crossed the street to avoid the Callahan name. Months later, on a bright morning washed gold with new sun, they came to the fortress to beg. Ren received them in a sitting room warm with light, draped in rich color that celebrated everything she had once apologized for, running a legitimate, holding company Cashin had put in her name. She did not gloat. She no longer needed to. "Ren, please," Delphine whispered, her poise gone, her eyes red. You have all of this now. Talk to him. Help us. Ren looked at her sister for a long moment and felt no cruelty, only a clean, quiet closing of a very old wound. I kept you all afloat for 6 years, she said gently, and you told 300 people that nobody wanted me. Father looked away. I am not going to hurt you, Delphine. I am simply going to stop being the thing that saves you. She rose, smoothing the silk over her hips. We are done. And she watched them go, and felt, at last, entirely free. Cashin found her at the tall window afterward, and came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her soft waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. You showed them more mercy than they deserved, he murmured. Mercy is its own kind of power, she said. Besides, I would rather build than burn. He turned her gently in his arms, his dark eyes soft in a way the rest of the world would never see. They told you nobody wanted you. Alma, he said quietly. They said it for 26 years, and you believed them, and all the while you were the only thing holding their whole world together. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. I did not cross that ballroom to save you. I crossed it because you were the only person in it worth walking toward. And I would do it again through fire, through war, through anything this city could put between us. Ren looked up at the man the whole world feared, a man who bowed to no one and yet bowed, entirely, to her, and for the first time in her life, she believed she was exactly enough. They had told her she was the spare, the consolation prize, the one nobody would ever choose, and she had proven every last one of them wrong, because she alone had ever offered a ruthless man something real. Nobody wants you, her sister had laughed in front of 300 people, and then the most dangerous man alive had crossed the entire room, in front of all of them, to prove that the whole world had simply been too blind to see her. If Ren and Cashin's story of cruelty, hidden worth, and hard-won vindication moved you, if you cheered when the mocked sister rose from that ballroom floor to dismantle an empire and claim the fearsome man who saw her when no one else would, then do us a small favor before you go. Smash that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that the person the world laughs at is so often the one with the most power hidden inside. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another twist-filled tale of the overlooked soul who finally gets everything she deserves. And drop a comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment in Ren and Cashin's story?